Okay, guys, so this is the lecture that goes with week 4, lesson 2, interpreting pedigrees. So how do we actually assign genotypes to individuals? And this goes with week 4, activity 2. So first of all, why use pedigrees? So pedigrees really help us figure out how traits are inherited or if they're even inherited at all. So some diseases are not genetic. They just happen later on in life. Usually, though, when they are inherited, what we notice is the diseases. We're not really looking at traits like hitchhiker's thumb or being able to roll your tongue. We're looking at diseases to see how those are inherited. It helps us figure out the genotypes of family members. In doing that, we know who carries the trait, who's heterozygous, and could pass it on. So they would be like big H, little h. They don't have the disease, but they could pass on the allele. So here's just some examples. And then finally, to help families plan for the future. So to just know what the likelihood of them producing children with the disease itself. Okay, so we're going to look at 2 inheritance patterns. The first one I'm going to show on this video is the autosomal recessive, which is carried on the autosomes. Remember, that's pairs 1 through 22. And one example is cystic fibrosis. So that's just where we use the normal letters. So big N would be completely healthy. Big N, little n would actually be a carrier. They're heterozygous. And little n actually would have cystic fibrosis. The other one we'll look at the next video is sex-linked recessive. So we'll look at that at the next video. All right, so interpreting a pedigree chart for an autosomal recessive disorder. So here we have just a very simple one. So let's assume this is for Tay-Sachs. And Tay-Sachs is a disorder where you can't break down lipids. They build up in your cells. You lack an enzyme, and it really affects nervous systems and can be very devastating. So we're going to use big N as normal and little n as Tay-Sachs. So the first thing we see is we have this filled N daughter. So we know right away, in order to have the trait that's recessive, both alleles have to be recessive. So that daughter is little n, little n. All right, so now we got to figure out everyone else. So you have to realize that she got 1 little n from mom and 1 little n from dad. However, none of these are affected, which means they all have to have at least 1 healthy allele, 1 big N. So we're going to give every single individual that's empty at least 1 big N, and then try to figure out the second allele. Now, she did receive 1 of these from each parent. Mom had to give 1 and dad had to give 1. So we know they have to have a little n to give. So they are both heterozygous, and she got these. Then we come to the son. Here's the thing. We don't know what he is until he has children and if they show up with the disease. So he's a question mark because he literally could be big N or big N little n. So we get this from the Punnett square. So you put the parents in, there she is, 25% chance. They could make a big N little n, and big N little n. So really the son could be any of these. We won't know until he has children and if any of those children have the disease. Okay, so sometimes you can show carriers in with a half filled in symbol. So carriers are always heterozygous, and so for autosomal recessive, they're going to be big N, little n, or any combination. But for sex-linked recessive, it's only female. So we'll do some of those. All right, so this is a carrier for the trait. They are half filled in, so they have to be big N, little n. We know that because this mom is affected. So we can fill in all the affected, okay, with little n, because they all have it. She can only give a little n. So the fact that he doesn't have it, but we know that he had to have gotten a little n from mom because that's all she has to give. All right, so now we figure out the rest. So here's the thing. Carriers are not always shown. In fact, they often are not because that's what we want you to figure out. So here's the thing. In order for this daughter to be affected, this dad has it, but the mom, daughter doesn't get both of these from dad. She gets 1. So the other one she got from mom. And same thing with here. He has 2. He got 1 from mom. He had to have gotten the other one from dad. So we know dad is a carrier in this case, and so we would fill them half in. And we also know that mom in this case, she's unaffected, but she is a carrier. So we'd fill her half in as well. And finally, this person is again an N question mark. We don't know until they have children. So big N, or big N, little n. So that would be carriers. But again, oftentimes they're not shown because that's what we want you to figure out.